Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. The year 2022 was a challenging year for all of us. The world continued to grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic. The Russia-Ukraine crisis disrupted the world as we know it. And in addition, we have Palestine-Israel conflict, the situation in Afghanistan, and China-U.S. relations. They all made the already uncertain international situation more complicated and more complex. What will we remember the year 2022 for? And what to expect in the new year, the year 2023? We'll try to answer all these questions in this special edition of Looking Ahead 2023. My first guest is Jeffrey Sachs from Vienna. He's a professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. Professor Sachs, we know that you're also on the Lancet COVID-19 Commission, which investigates and analyzes the pandemic. Do you think it's safe to say that the worst is behind us as so many countries reopen its borders and readjust to their COVID policies, China included recently, although people are suffering from a fresh wave of infections, but many people remain hopeful that the worst is behind. How would you compare China's relaxation and its new pandemic rules, easing its pandemic rules and restrictions these days?
I think we need to understand that there were three phases of this pandemic. First, there was the initial outbreak, and that was a very dangerous and virulent form of this virus. In 2020, there were no vaccines available yet, of course. And so the quite tough measures that were taken by China, the zero COVID policy, and that was a kind of measure taken basically throughout the Asia Pacific region, also Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. That made sense. It saved lives. We didn't do that in the United States in that way, and we had hundreds of thousands of deaths because of that, whereas China really kept the death rate low. Then the second phase came with the new variants like Delta, which were very dangerous, in fact, but also the spread of vaccination. This should have been done much more cooperatively than it was. We should have shared technologies. We should have not made technologies a matter of vaccine nationalism or of commercial narrow interests for a lot of reasons. We didn't do that. Nonetheless, there was a lot of vaccination, but also a lot of inequality and doubts raised and many other problems. But still, the second phase was the vaccination phase. And the strength for China is that it reached very high vaccination rates, around 90%. Of course, because of the low incidence of the disease, some of the really vulnerable people, the older people, didn't take a vaccine. They said, we're not in danger. And they need to be vaccinated, and that's key for now. The third phase of this was Omicron. The Omicron variant is less lethal, certainly, but really infective. And it was nearly impossible to suppress it with the zero COVID policy, simply because it's so infectious, much more infectious than the original variants. Yeah. And so for that reason, China was in the process of lock down this city, lock down this city, lock down this city. It could not be sustained. If it had been the original variant, it actually would have worked, most likely, as it did for the first 2 years. But with Omicron, it couldn't. So we're really in a phase right now where we have to rely on vaccination and treatment. We have to rely on especially vulnerable older people or people with other kinds of comorbidities or prior conditions taking special care. We have to watch really hard for new variants because this is absolutely a danger. We should finally be cooperating and coordinating on best practices and vaccine technologies. It's just terrible that even though our governments put in the vast sums for these vaccines, they were privatized so that we're not sharing some of the deep know-how that every part of the world should have. And I hope that we could move beyond this false commercial model, because it's not really commercial. The US government paid for so much of the development of the Moderna vaccine, for example, but then said, okay, you get it, it's your profits. That doesn't make sense. So we really need to be very alert in 2023. Yes, maybe the worst is over. Let's hope. High vaccination rates, a lower lethality, but there could be new variants and new dangers. And we didn't cooperate properly in 2020, 2021, and 2022. Let's put it on our resolution list that we actually cooperate on COVID in 2023, so that we do everything we can to ensure that the worst is over.
I want to shift gears a little bit, Professor Sachs, and talk about the impact of the end of COVID, or the beginning of the end of COVID, for the world economy. That is really on the mind of many, because after all, so many people around the world need jobs, they need better capacity to take care of their families. As China eases its COVID policy and soon hopefully opens up its border with no quarantine requirement, hopefully, what do you think that will mean for the global economy? Because according to many estimates, the global economy is in a very bad shape going into 2023.
We need China to open, and for Chinese businesses to be traveling outside. I need to get back to China, frankly. It's been 3 years, and I need to get back so soon. I can see friends and brainstorm on these issues together. We really need to reconnect the world economy. We really need to stop the nonsense of decoupling, which is a wrong-headed idea. Our interconnections are good and important for us. We can't solve problems on our own. We need actually to see a scale up of programs like the Belt and Road Initiative, because China is out there saying we will help our neighbors and even some distant neighbors to invest in infrastructure, digital, energy, transport, so that we can be interconnected together. This is a fantastic thing. By the way, it creates a lot of jobs. China exports a lot of the infrastructure, the machinery, the technology, and others do as well. So those kinds of investment-led programs are extremely important. And I think China has a major role to play. You know, there was a lot of attack from the outside on the Belt and Road Initiative, almost all of it wrong, most of it for geopolitical narrative reasons, because it's an important and positive initiative. Within China, there were doubts or loss of confidence in this approach. Well, are we just pouring money into something that doesn't make sense for us? But actually, it's an important initiative, and I really hope that it goes forward strongly. It should be, of course, a green, sustainable Belt and Road Initiative, but China has a huge role to play in helping to build the 21st century infrastructure in ASEAN, in Africa, in Latin America, and so forth. And that will be very good for China's economy and very good for the world economy.
Yeah, talking about the war in Ukraine, you remained optimistic. Actually, in early December, you wrote, and I quote, "There is now a new glimmer of hope for a quick negotiated end to the war in Ukraine." What makes you see a new glimmer of hope?
Well, lots of people of influence called for a negotiated end to the war. Our top military man, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, said this is the time to negotiate. President Emmanuel Macron of France said we can find a way out through negotiation, respecting everybody's security interests. China has gotten it right, in my view, saying repeatedly, end the war, respect the security interests of all parties. In my view, it's not hard to see what a solution would be. So much of this war was provoked by the U.S. pushing its military alliance, NATO, into Ukraine and deeper into Russia's neighborhood in the Black Sea. That was dangerous and provocative. Russia viewed it as a threat to its national security, I think plausibly so. All the United States has to do is pick up the phone and say, stop the war. We don't expand NATO. You end the military conflict. We find a way to guarantee Ukraine's security. This war could end quickly.
Professor Sachs, I want to ask you about China-U.S. relations. The year 2022 has seen quite a bit of ups and downs. Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, a very controversial visit to this Chinese province. And then U.S. has launched multiple rounds of sanctions against China and Chinese individuals, including a ban on chip export. Then, of course, we had this long-awaited meeting between President Xi and President Biden in Bali, Indonesia. How would you summarize the year 2022 when it comes to U.S.-China interactions? And perhaps more importantly, your prediction for China-U.S. relations going forward?
There is a battle in the U.S. between hardliners, so-called neocons or neoconservatives, and those who want cooperative relations with China, which is a lot of us and a lot of the business community as well. That battle continues. From the neocon point of view, the idea for the U.S. is to contain China, stop or slow China's progress, actually, hinder China's access to technology, and ensure that the United States remains number one. That's their vision. To my mind, it is mind-boggling, harmful, dangerous, provocative, can really get us into conflict, and unimaginable. Who wants to contain China? What a terrible idea. What we want is economic progress that goes around for the whole world, actually, and everybody can get ahead in a safe and sustainable manner. So the idea that the world is a zero-sum struggle, which is the neoconservative idea, is absolutely wrong. The world is a place where we're all in it together. We face some very big crises and common challenges together, and where economic progress can be spread. It's not one against the other. So this is the battle going on in U.S. foreign policy. I believe that the right approach absolutely is for the two sides to meet each other, to establish again a structured, strategic dialogue, because there are a lot of complicated issues. These are two giant economies with a huge sway in the world. They should be talking to each other carefully, in detail, not throwing charges in the social media and sound bites and provocative trips like Pelosi took over the strenuous objections of China. No, this should be a relationship of mutual respect, of prudence, and of a lot of dialogue, and where necessary, of some hard negotiating as well. But that's what's going to get us to be able to prosper together and to solve problems together. So at the end of 2022, that battle within U.S. foreign policy continues. The meeting between the two presidents, in my view, was extremely important. The follow-up of Blinken's visit can be quite useful. What I'm hoping comes out of it is a structured, ongoing, intensive dialogue. And of course, I very much like and promote so-called track two dialogues as well for all the rest of us, that we're making as much contact, discussion, and analysis together as is possible.
Yeah, I mean, foreign policy starts at home, and there are two major political events happening respectively in China and the United States as well. One is U.S. midterm elections, where the Democrats lost control of the House. How much weaker does that leave President Joe Biden and his Democratic Party? And what do you think it would mean for America's foreign policy making, especially its China policy?
It leaves Biden weaker in that it will be very difficult, very unlikely for Biden to pass any significant legislation going forward. Even legislation actually supported pretty broadly and by both parties, because the Republican majority in the House of Representatives will not want to give even political victories, even if they support the substance, to Biden, because now in the U.S. mindset, we're already in the presidential elections for 2024. So there's always a look, what does this mean for the next election? So in this sense, I think Biden is actually considerably weakened. There won't be major legislative packages, most likely. There will be investigations on many issues in the House of Representatives because of the Republican majority. They'll aim to tie up the administration in many ways. But with respect to Chinese foreign policy vis-a-vis China, I'm not sure that this has any decisive play, because I would say it's the dominant position of both parties right now to take a hard line towards China. It's not wise. It's not the right foreign policy. It's not serious in my view, but it's what is continued in 2023. It may make a push at the same time, though, towards more negotiating, more support for negotiations, I should say, in the Ukraine war context, because a lot of the Republican side is far less enthusiastic about continuing to pour tens of billions of dollars of finance and armaments into Ukraine, and actually believe, as I do, that we need a negotiated outcome.
Yeah, the other important political event is the party congress here in China. As a China watcher, I really want to ask you about your take on the significance of the Communist Party of China's 20th Party Congress, where the Chinese leadership apparently emerged even more consolidated and more powerful. Where do you think that leadership will take China, especially when it comes to China's foreign relations with the West, with the U.S.? Because it is a question repeatedly asked by Western elites.
I think China's deep interest, and I think it was expressed very clearly by President Xi and very clearly by the 20th Party Congress, is that China wants a stable, multilateral system under the UN Charter. There's a lot of rhetoric about a rule-based system. The U.S. calls for a rule-based system, but never defines what that means. If there is such a rule-based system, it should be the UN rules. And that would be very good. And it makes sense also for China as one of the permanent 5 countries and one of the leaders of the UN system, that we actually double down on the multilateral system, make the UN work properly, give it its centrality on problem solving like climate change or biodiversity, where there is no alternative really. And so I'm heartened by China's both its, I think, the right perception of the right policy, and also by the statements that were very clearly made and are typically made by China, which is that China supports a multilateral system under the UN Charter. And with China helping to lead on that, and I very much hope in cooperation with other major countries, and not viewing this as a necessary conflict, even if the United States does provoke or prod, or some in the U.S., the neocons call for that China just keeps a very steady position. We need multilateralism. We need the UN system. We need cooperation within our region. We need cooperation between regions, such as with the European Union or the African Union. I think that this actually will work. I don't see another way, but I think that China's position is correct on this, and in China's clear interest.